Arizonans voted to protect abortion access, but roadblocks remain. We'll explain what they are. The future of Arizona's largest county will be in new hands next month. One of Maricopa County's newest supervisors talks about the challenges that lie ahead, including what can be done to keep the Arizona Diamondbacks at Chase Field. And following a disappointing election, the leader of the Arizona Democratic Party wants to keep her job. But does she deserve it? That's next on Politics Unplugged.
And good evening, I'm political editor Dennis Welch. This is Politics Unplugged in Arizona. Arizonans voted last month to enshrine the right to an abortion in the state constitution, but that doesn't mean the previous laws on abortion just go away. Here to talk about what comes next is Athena Salmon from the Reproductive Rights for All. I want to thank you very much for being here. And again, we do know at this point that there is a lawsuit that has been filed, not by your group, but a separate group that wants to strip away the 15-week abortion law that bans abortions after 15 weeks, that doesn't include any exceptions for rape and incest, because it conflicts with that newly passed voter-passed constitutional amendment. But there are a number of other laws on the books, and we're bringing you on here to talk a little bit about that. So what are we looking at here? How many of these types of laws are you guys seeing?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this morning to talk about the voters enshrining historically a right to abortion in the Arizona Constitution. I want to ground people that this vote was not narrow. It was an overwhelming majority of 61%. And so as we're looking at the bans and restrictions that were passed by previous legislatures in previous years, there's going to take a lot of work through the executive branch, through the judicial branch, to get clarity on what's in effect and what's not, since many of these restrictions, I believe, conflict with the constitutional right. But you know, some of the restrictions that we still have, the books 24-hour waiting period, we still have mandatory ultrasounds. And so we are seeing with the first lawsuit with the 15-week ban, the beginning of trying to overturn some of these pretty bad laws. And
do you expect that there's going to be resistance to trying to get rid of these laws that are still on the books at this time?
Well, the voters of Arizona made it very clear they support a fundamental right to abortion. Unfortunately, what we did see with the legislative races and the makeup down there is that we did not elect a reproductive freedom majority. So the pathway to repeal the restrictions and bans on the books is next to impossible. But what we saw during the election cycle is many of these Republicans who have pretty extreme anti-abortion records running from those records, changing their tune on abortion because there's such overwhelming support for abortion rights in Arizona. And so we are going to be holding their feet to the fire to ensure that they are doing, all the elected officials down there at the Capitol are doing their part to expand access to abortion rights and reproductive freedom overall.
And let's talk a little bit about some of these laws specifically and how that you see that they get in the way or may create a roadblock for a woman who wants to get an abortion. You talked about the 24-hour waiting period. That's pretty self-explanatory. So you have to wait 24 hours. Like, how do you see that as a problem and conflicting with this new law?
You know, when you look at the constitutional amendment, first and foremost, it creates a fundamental right. Secondly, you take, for example, the 24-hour waiting period. That does not advance the health or safety of the pregnant individual as a patient. It's not grounded in any evidence-based or standards of practice. So really, what we are looking at is when someone is seeking abortion care, that they're able to access that care without roadblocks and arbitrary barriers that are designed to make it difficult, if not for some populations, nearly impossible to make those own personal decisions. And Dennis, you know, our organization, we have over 80,000 members in Arizona, Reproductive Freedom for All. We were formerly NARAL, Pro-Choice America, but changed our name last year. And what you see from not just our members, but overwhelmingly with the public is Arizonans want the government to stop making these decisions, these personal, private medical decisions for them. They want the freedom to decide for themselves. So, you know, we are going to continue to hold our government's feet to the fire to make sure that that freedom rests with the pregnant individual, and that politicians aren't making and micromanaging those decisions.
And we are heading into a new session. So, are there any other laws that your group, people you talk to, say like, look, we really need to focus on getting rid of this or amending this or getting clarity on this law?
Yeah, it's with the election of Donald Trump entering a second term of office, we saw pretty clearly the proposals in Project 2025, and with his appointments that he is trying to advance forward, he very much intends to make good on what was in Project 2025. Project 2025 does not only include a nationwide ban on abortion, but it does include restrictions and barriers and retracting access to contraception. Last session, we were involved in part of the push to the Right to Contraception Act. We will be making another push, take abortion aside. Why isn't the Republican majority allowing a fundamental right and guarantee that no matter what happens at the federal level in Arizona, your access to contraception is going to be protected? So when we talk about reproductive freedom, abortion is one component of that. But what we're really talking about is every individual has a right to decide if, when, and how to start their family, and that includes abortion care, birth control, in vitro fertilization, and just any other aspect.
And we did see with the election results, Republicans did expand the numbers down at the state capitol. Given the party's historical stance when it comes to abortion, do you find it's going to be a harder year to try to get any cooperation from this legislature? Do you think they're going to look at the election results, see what see what you just pointed out, that this overwhelmingly passed, and said, the voters out there, they really want us to do something on this?
I think that there's a risk that they are mistaken, that, we're seeing with the national anti-abortion movement, as extreme as it is, they think they have a mandate because Donald Trump won. But when you look at the competitive districts where the Republicans narrowly secured those seats, you looked at the Republicans in those seats, whether it's Shauna Bullock or Matt Gress, had to backtrack on the fact that they previously, with fetal personhood and with other aspects, had been advocating for total abortion bans. So they had to backtrack on that. And once we have the data to show district by district how well Prop 139, the constitutional amendment, performed, what we see statewide is it got more votes than Donald Trump, than Ruben Gallego, than the Supreme Court justices, right? And when you look in those districts, I would not be surprised. It's better than any poll can show you. It probably outperformed them as well. So we are going into the next legislative session with a mandate that Arizonans overwhelmingly support the fundamental right to abortion and want the government and their politicians to stop interfering, stop creating barriers, and ensure that the access remains available to the Arizonans who need it.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to have to end it right there. That's all the time we have. We'll see you, and welcome back here anytime you want. And still ahead, how badly do county leaders want to keep the Diamondbacks at Chase Field? That's one of the issues facing the incoming county supervisor. We'll talk with him when Politics Unplugged continues. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. The Maricopa County Board of Supervisors will have 3 new members next year, but some familiar issues to deal with, including working on a new deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks at Chase Field. Here to talk about that, Supervisor-elect Mark Stewart. I want to thank you very much for being here, starting a new job. Just before we start getting into the issues, I mean, what are you looking forward to accomplishing here during your term? I mean, what's first on the agenda?
Yeah, I think the big thing is trying to make sure that we can get Maricopa out of the news, right? I think that's one of the things that most of the people that I met with out on the campaign trail were concerned about. And so I think that's the big thing out front. But I think taking some of the experience that I've got in Chandler, well-run city, great staff, using some of that background at the county, I think will be helpful. And just the energy, I have an innovative mindset. I'm an entrepreneur, so I want to kind of empower staff to do the best that they can and make the county even better.
How do you take Maricopa County out of the news? I mean, over the past few years, the county's made a lot of news. There's been a lot of headlines, particularly over elections. Where are you on this? I mean, when it comes to election denialism or, rigged elections, what do you think needs to be done there to get that out of the news?
Yeah, I think the big thing, and I'll just be straight up, the governor needs to sign a bill that allows us to get our early ballots in faster, right? And get those counted so that we can get results day of. Right? That's been clear. There was a bill that was presented last year that didn't get signed that would have solved some of those issues this year. I think the state, heck, the nation, doesn't need to wait 2 weeks to get the results. There are other states that do it way better, or at least faster than we do. And so I think that's the primary thing we need to get accomplished.
Yeah, and I think that bill is back. I believe it's a J.D. Mesnard bill from your neck of the woods.
We've talked.
And yeah, I was going to say, you've probably talked with him, and I think there is that bill out there that would end dropping off your early ballot. You'd have to drop it off by the Friday before the election. You couldn't drop it off the day of unless you had ID and whatnot. Is this a bill that you would support? Is this a bill that you might be down at the Capitol lobbying on behalf of the county?
I think we're all going to join hands in this, and I think we're going to get bipartisan support for something like this. It's the time to get this over with is now. And so, there'll be questions about how it will work. We'll work through those details when I get on the board, but at least we can get ballots in a week ahead of time so that we can get those counted at the counting center. And then we can also, if you forget, right, you don't get it in time, and it's almost a month to get it mailed. If you don't get that done, you can walk up day of, open up your ballot, or take it, run it through the tabulator so we can get the tabulation that night. So if we can get 90 to 95% of the ballots counted on election day and provide those results by 8 or 9 o'clock that night, I think we're out of the news.
All right, well, and another issue that has the county in the news all the time is the Diamondbacks Chase Field. Obviously, it is a county public asset. The stadium out there is a publicly funded stadium out there. Where are you on this? How do you put this issue to bed? There's there's some fighting between the team and the county about over maintenance and some costs there. How would you propose putting this issue to bed?
Yeah, certainly. I've got the same information you have because I'm not in the chair. So the information that they've got at the county level, I don't have that yet. So I need to read through that when I get on the board and get a brief from staff, get an understanding where the DBacks are, and just try to take in as much information as I can to make the right decision for the county. I mean, we love the Diamondbacks in Arizona. I mean, I've taken my kids when they were tiny babies till they're adults now, and I'm just a big fan of theirs. But we've got to do what's right for the taxpayer, and we've got to do what's right by the Diamondbacks. And I think we can come to an agreement.
Yeah. And by doing what's right with the taxpayer, I mean, just in general, would you be willing to pony up more public taxpayer money to keep the Diamondbacks here, just as a philosophy, a general rule? Would you be willing to do that?
It's based on ROI, right? So I look at everything like a business. That's what the county is. So we've got to look at if the ROI is there from the ability to bring in events from outside of the state besides the Diamondbacks. It's got to make sense for us to keep the Diamondbacks here because the tax revenue that it generates. So it's all about ROI, and I don't have those numbers just yet. But when I get them,
and I get it. It sounds great, like you want to wait for the return on investment to see that. But what if it's not there? I mean, the Diamondbacks are a big part of downtown Phoenix. It's a big asset here.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to walk away and let the Diamondbacks go find a different place to play baseball, be in the East Valley somewhere else?
We're not going to let that happen. We need to keep the D-backs here. So if we'll figure out a way to do that. And so I think one of the great things about getting in a room and just kind of talking, back and forth and trying to figure out solutions, we can get there. And so the good thing is that I'm a good listener, right? And we'll try to figure out the best path forward.
Okay, and now obviously you're stepping into a new job. You've been meeting with folks that you're going to be working with. What are the conversations like that you're having with them? What sounds like it's going to be kind of front and center when you take over here in January?
Well, front and center is obviously getting the ballots done a week ahead of time, right? Yeah. That's going to be some heavy lifting that we're going to do at the county with our legislature and hopefully Governor Hobbs. She's made some good common sense moves, and I think this will be another one that she does. I think a big thing that nobody's talking about right now is, and I'll bring it up, this might be the first time that it's being brought forward, is the DOJ has been fleecing the taxpayer about $300 million now from something that happened over a decade ago with the Arpaio administration. We need the taxpayer, the community needs that money to hire more sheriff deputies, right? We need to train them better. We need to just invest in them more. It's so important for so many reasons, but the tune of $12 to $15 million a year, we're just giving to a consulting agency, and it just doesn't make sense anymore. We're meeting 90% of the things that the
The federal overseer wants to see in there.
Thank you. And we need some relief there so that we can invest.
Yeah. But how do you get that relief? What does that look like? What are the conversations like?
Again, I think we just have to get into a room and say, guys, there's a common sense way to approach this. If we're meeting 90% of the goal, well, then we'll pay you just 10% of the fees for the consulting agency. Or we narrow it down and say, these are checked off, remove them from the list of things that we have to do, and then get this 10% finished. It should cost us less so that we can take that taxpayer dollar and put it where it belongs, which is in our sheriff's department. And I've already talked with Jerry Sheridan about that. I've talked with the other county supervisors about that. That's going to be a primary goal of ours.
Yeah, obviously the prior sheriff, Paul Pinzone, has been complaining about it. Jerry Sheridan isn't exactly a big fan of this, the incoming sheriff. So obviously a lot of people at the county want to see moves made on this front. But
it's federal meddling now. It was purposeful when it happened. Now it's just an anchor on our sheriff's department.
All right, we're going to have to end it right there. Mark Stewart, the incoming supervisor-elect here at Maricopa County. I want to thank you very much for stopping by here. Dennis. And up next, I'll be bringing in our panel to talk about all this week's major headlines, including the head of the Democratic Party, hoping to keep her job after a rough election season. That's next, right here on Politics Unplugged. And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. Time to take a look at the top issues of the week with our panel. Republican consultant Matt Benson and former Democratic lawmaker Reginald Boulding. I want to thank you both for being here. Let's start with the topic du jour is that the head of the Democratic Party, Yolanda Bejarano, wants to keep her job. She wants another term as chair of the Democratic Party. Given the election results that we saw, yes, Ruben Gallego did win the Senate race, but it looks, you look at everything else, it wasn't a great year for Democrats. Does she deserve a second to keep her job?
Well, I would say, that job is determined by, state committee party members, and, the general public, they have no clue who the chair is. I think right now the Democratic Party is in a place where, there's going to be a lot of questions, and whether it's from within the party or outside of the party. And I think questions are good. Whether or not she deserves a second term, that's going to be up to the party chair, the party apparatus. But, I think people, they're going to want to have some questions.
And Matt, looking at it from the outside there, do you think a party chair who doesn't have that great of an election season, do they deserve to keep their job in a situation like this?
Oh, Republicans in Arizona fully endorse another term for her. I mean, look, Arizona Democrats spent millions of dollars in order to lose seats in the legislature, lose these swing congressional seats, lose ground at basically every step, failed to take out the judges that they went after. I mean, it was a disaster all in all for the party. And so, do it. We're fully on board.
Well, what needs to change? I mean, I know you were involved in some voter registration efforts in that. And when you look at the voter registration advantages for the Republicans this year, they were pretty big. I believe it was 300,000 difference in voter registration advantages there. Why aren't more people registering with the Democratic Party, and what does the Democratic Party need to do to relate with the average voter?
Well, I think one of the things that's clearly important is when you ask someone on the street, what does it mean to be a Republican or a Democrat? Most people can't articulate that. And that's just not a Democratic Party thing. That's across the board. But I do think that you have to have, the party has to, people should be able to say, what you stand for, what your values are. And I think that is a place where the Democratic Party is going to continue to evolve. But ultimately, when you look at a lot of these races, we're talking margin thin, right? The legislature, it was lost. We lost at the, at the presidential level. But it was a coin flip. This was the same thing a few years ago. So it's okay.
And let's talk a little bit about the Republican Party leadership. We haven't heard much about what Gina Swoboda will be doing or whatnot. But from your perspective, would you like to see her stay in this job? Because it's been a very different vibe coming out of her office than it was in prior chairmanships. I'm speaking mostly about Kelly Ward, who made a lot of different headlines for various reasons. You haven't heard a lot coming out of Swoboda's office.
Yeah, absolutely. Gina's terrific. I hope she stays in that position, gets us through this next cycle, which is going to be a big one with the statewide offices up. So, look, you really hit on it. I mean, this is about registering voters and raising money. And the Republican Party, Arizona Republican Party, has been successful at both, in particular registering voters over the last cycle. I mean, a 300,000 voter registration edge in this state what we saw in this cycle was if you're that far behind as a party, very difficult to win these close races. So I hope Gina sticks around.
Yeah, and some of the things, when you start looking down ballot, it's just a matter of registration numbers when you start looking at some of the closer legislative races out there. And those have consequences as Republicans expanded their majorities at the legislature. And we're already seeing some of the effects of that. We saw this week alone, and I'll have a comment on this, Senator John Kavanaugh reintroduce some of his transgender bills. One would be dealing with pronouns in schools, and the other is the so-called bathroom bill, which I believe he was introducing back when you were first getting elected to the legislature. Just want to hear your comments on Mr. Kavanaugh bringing these pieces of legislation back.
You know the phrase that, elections have consequences. This is, what that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that the average everyday voter who may have voted for John Kavanaugh or a Republican majority wanted, bathroom bills that's front and center. They want Arizonans that can work together, that can actually improve the economy, make sure people, can live safely here. And they're not asking for this. So, I think, Republicans in the legislature make it easier for Democrats during election time because they create these so far or right-wing messages and bills that people aren't asking for. It has no chance of passing. Maybe he refers it to the ballot. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and that's one of the storylines we'll be watching this year is how much do they refer to the ballot like they did in the prior 2 years. But Matt, obviously Kavanaugh feels like he scores political points with these types of bills. Is this smart politics on him? Because I did ask him particularly about his so-called bathroom bill. He said it was mostly to prevent people in shower situations at schools or in locker rooms or whatnot. I asked him for specific examples of where this had happened, and he said he didn't have any. So this is a pure raw political play on his point?
Well, look, you're right. He's been bringing this particular bill for over a decade now, right? Maybe approaching 15 years. So this clearly is a concern of his. It's not going to become law. The governor's not going to sign it. So I think one of the things we saw over this past election was that this issue has a lot of potency with voters and with swing voters. And as you've seen in some of the schools, concerns about students and using different pronouns at school and the parents at home not being aware of it and some schools kind of hiding that from them. So I think you're kind of seeing a reaction to some of that.
All right, and let's wrap on this, and I'll just open this up to whoever wants to start the conversation on here. We saw the transportation tax here overwhelmingly pass in Maricopa County, but it didn't. It was like 59.9%, 89%, or something like that. The Republican Party, the Maricopa County Republicans, are suing to block that because they're arguing it didn't reach a 60% threshold. This could have major ramifications down the road if the courts hold this up, correct?
There's no question. If ultimately the courts, and I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up at the Arizona Supreme Court at some point, if they determine that the 60% threshold at a state level applies to local government taxes as well, we may never see another school bond passed in this state. So the implications of that are huge. It's really something to watch.
All right, unfortunately, we're out of time. We're going to have to end it right there. That is all the time we have. But be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged. Good night.